My name is Deanie Hurst. I am the great-great-granddaughter of William Lettsworth Hurst, and his son was Grandpa Emerson. We called him Grandpa M, and he lived to be 103, they say. They wasn't quite sure because of his birth certificate, but, he lived quite a long time, and then from him, there was my Grandpa Ed, James Edward Hurst. And he had throat cancer and ended up passing on, but he was a good man. And then after Grandpa, there was my daddy, James Hurst. And then me. And I had two brothers. They both passed away. He was a prisoner of war in the Confederates. And he came here from Tennessee, and then he found a good piece of land, and then the railroad started railroad through, and we give them the rights to come on our land, so they call it the Hurst Depot, because that's all it was at one time, was a depot. And then the city was built around the depot, so then it was Hurst City. He was a trader. He traded for goat, for a cow, or for some land, for, milk goat, or, eggs for chickens, and, vegetables, grow the garden and swap vegetables. That's how people lived out here that I recall. I met my great-grandpa Emerson, we call him Grandpa M, and I believe he died when he was 103, but they weren't sure because he didn't, your birth certificates back then, they just believed that he was that old. But he homesteaded right here off Precinct Line, which back then there was nothing but, a couple of creeks and woodwork, and he'd take his hound and go hunting out there, and, but then everything was built around Hurst, it seemed like. The porch still stands. It's off Precinct Line before the post office. And there's, like I say, the porch is out there and it's full of greenery and stuff, but we used to have a house that sat there. And that's where they had the cellar at. And everything's gone, but that porch still sits, and it's a big old piece of land out there. He was my great-grandpa Emerson, and every night I'd go in his bedroom and tell him good night, and he would give me the little Kraft caramel candies and had it in a sack. And so I'd get one of those, and I never got one without him giving it to me, because I thought, if he gets me in that sack of candy, I'd never get another one. And he'd take him a nip of whiskey, And that I remember vividly. And there was, when he passed away, you couldn't get down the road. The place was packed with cars, coming over, bringing food, giving, their sympathies, and, But yeah, and then at their funeral, I remember that was my first funeral I'd ever been to. That place was packed. And that house back there where the porch is, and there was a cellar. Because I remember one time a storm was coming, and they made us all go down in that cellar. And I remember that part. And I always used to sit outside out back, and they had the garden, so they'd put me on the table with the watermelon and the spoon and some salt, and I'd eat watermelon all the time. That's a good, fond memory. So Granny was a Sparger, and Grandpa was a Hurst. My Granny and Grandpa Hurst lived off Precinct, between Precinct and Davis. They had 3 acres right there that they homesteaded. And they put cows and goats and chickens and hound dogs and, had everything. And Daddy, we all lived there, Daddy, Granny, Grandpa, me, and my 2 brothers. And like I say, they took us in, and I loved living out here. Ride your bike, walk, just, it was all country, dirt roads. And it was at peace. It was so peaceful. I still feel peaceful to this day, But I really enjoyed, being raised out here. His sister Viola had married R.W. Gibbons out of Haltom City, and it was asphalt company, so making roads and stuff. So Grandpa worked there, and then when he got on Social Security, he worked so much a year still, until he couldn't work anymore, and then he got throat cancer. They called him Smiley because he never smiled. So, that's why Daddy said, hey, Smiley, and, he was just a rough old country, but he was the sweetest. If you got to know him, and talk to him, he was, a good old man, but I just remember he always was up at 4 o'clock every morning and gone to bed at 7. I do the same thing to this day. I don't know why, but he was up every morning, taking care of his animals, feeding his hounds, and he had, like I say, 13 or 14 siblings, and one of them had pigs, that they slaughtered, so we had the sausage, and, the other one had something else, so we didn't really have to go to the grocery store, like I say, and then my daddy had the garden and the tree orchard, and so we just lived off the land a lot, My grandpa had registered milk goats, and all during the month he'd go to the sales, and then Canton, Fort Worth, all these sales that they'd go to on certain days. And when he'd sell his goat milk for $5 a gallon, and people came from miles around because the milk was 7 times better than cow milk, and the protein in it helped people with their stomachs. We had people coming from all over the place just to get that goat milk. And Grandpa, they were all registered goats, just not a cheap milk goat. He got the good stuff. And a lot of people with the garden we had, our relatives would come over, Daddy'd pick it, and they'd come over and get the vegetables and, how much milk they wanted. They sold also cow milk, But yeah, a lot of, like I say, Grandpa having 13, 14 brothers and sisters, half of Hurst is related to, We had like 39 cats. When you say kitty, kitty, here they come. But we also had bread for the dogs, and the dog food for the dogs, and the alfalfa and the hay and the goat food and all the food for chickens. And you got your big field rats or your little mice. It doesn't matter. They eat, and they eat all the food, and, also contaminate it from getting on it. So we didn't have any rats. We didn't have any snakes, because when you have cats, you don't have all that. On Precinct Line, where we had the 3 acres out, there was a barn that was made out of concrete brick, and that's a real good brick. And they left it out there. That's where Grandpa left all the food for his animals, and then Daddy made a mechanic area out of it. But it's still there. They left it there, so I thought that was pretty cool. When I was younger, there was all kinds of cattle and horses and all kinds of stuff, so I didn't take the roads. I always cut through, the back country, And all the animals would come to me, so I thought, well, I got a pair one time, and that's all it took. So every day I'd go out there, and they'd follow me around and eat the pears or whatever I had to give them. And then there was a fishing tank. We'd got a 12-pound catfish out of that tank, and, it was all country. A house here or there, But the roads back then were just one, the one road we had, it was still dirt, and, it was just gravel with some tar on it seemed like, But I really enjoyed, like I say, being raised on the creek around us. I caught scarlatina from playing in stagnant water. So they lured the school not to play in stagnant water. And I got real sick from playing in it, but I continued playing in it. But I enjoyed being raised up out here. Grandpa mostly did the animals. Daddy and Granny did the garden. Grandpa would go all the way to Timbuktu for a sale, a goat sale or a dog sale. He did all the animal stuff, but Granny and Daddy did the gardening and the picking and the peeling and all that stuff and the plowing and then washing clothes for 3 kids. And she was already getting up there. She done raised 3 kids, and here come 3 more on top of her. So she had a lot of love in her heart. She had a heart of gold. She tried to drive once, and she ran over my daddy, so she never tried driving again. And she cooked. She was in that kitchen all the time cooking some good food, but she went blind because she had an eye disease, macular degeneration. And then my daddy got it. I didn't get it. One of my cousins got it. But yeah, she went blind, and that stopped the cooking and everything. But she had a heart of gold. When John Barfield builds homes, after they're done, you have to have somebody go in there and clean the houses and get all the dust out of the cupboards and clean the toilets and make it livable and clean the windows. And my granny did all that. And then when I got older, I did that too, for John Barfield. And he had houses. That's the only guy I think back then that had houses out here. But yeah, we both worked for him. Real good man. I liked him. And then my daddy was James Olin. Off Brown Trail, there's a street sign that says James Street. That's where my daddy was born. And I thought that was pretty cool. He was a shade tree mechanic. Now, I think he went to school in California for a little while, but mostly just shade tree. And my ex-husband had a diesel vehicle, and Daddy could tell by the noise of the diesel who it was. And if you pulled up in the yard, he'd tell you something's going out on your car. I called him once on the phone, and back when they had the pay phones, I called him up and I said, Daddy, my car's doing this, and that. He said, well, you need to get you a clothes hanger and wrap it around this and do that, yada, yada. I did it. I made it home. One time I made it home on fumes. My car wouldn't start, so I called my daddy. He ran through the whole car, couldn't find no problems. I was out of gas. You want to see a mad daddy? Because he said, you must have got home on the fumes. But yeah, he knew cars. My daddy was in World War II. And he went to Germany. And he came back talking a little bit of German, so he was there. But even through all that war that he went through, he still had a good heart. A lot of people, it breaks them and they go mental, but Daddy still had that love and the patience. He helped raise my son, and I'd have picked him up and whipped his butt. Dad, get away, but just the patience, just the love that my daddy had, even after World War II. I was born in Palm Springs, California, me and my brother. And my oldest brother was born here in Fort Worth. But we came to visit all the time and, stayed a week or two, and we came. And my daddy went out to Palm Springs, California, and worked for the water company and had a new house, a new car, but him and Mama just couldn't click. So he come back to Texas. And so we want to come out here too, because Mama, I don't know what happened. But anyway, then we came to Texas in 1960. And my grandpa and my granny, they got custody of us. So they were our legal, guardians. When I first got here when I was 6, there was dirt roads and trees, country, and a couple of tanks here and there, and you seen the cattle, you seen everything, just the birds flying in the sky, chirping, talking, and there was always somebody had chickens wherever you went. You heard the clucking of the chickens. I started school at Smithville Elementary up on Main Street. It's called, I don't know, it's North Richland Hills now, but the city used to be Smithville. They had a post office, a store, and a church, of course, and just a little 1 through 6th grade, and it was Smithville Elementary, and the bus would pick us up every morning and take us home. And then from Smithville, they bused us to Richland Hills, Richland Junior, and then Watauga Junior opened up, and they sent us to Watauga, and then back to Richland High School. The first thing that I seem to remember when I first got here, though, was that a car lot, not a car lot, but a car sale dealer up on Pipeline or Bedford out this way, there was a car dealership. And that's the first thing I remember that coming up. Yeah, there was a feed store on Davis and a feed store on Precinct Line. And that's the only place that a grocery store, unless you went all the way to Buddy's or, downtown somewhere. But there wasn't any little local grocery stores or anything. And I could go in and get a sack full of candy for $1. Everything was a penny. And I'd ride my bike up, riding my bike up there, and it was just, and nobody would pick you up, even if you wanted to ride, because they'd wave at you and say, "Oh, look, she's walking, that's good," but they wouldn't pick you up. Everybody that had a house had a car, of some sort, It's one person, one car to a house. It wasn't like 5 cars sitting out front. And when you went to the store, you had to go all the way to Leonard's, downtown Fort Worth, to get any clothes or, shoes and stuff like that. And then you had, on the way back home, there was a Buddy's. My Aunt Truda worked there. And it was the first grocery store, major grocery store, was the Buddy's. And that's the first store I remember, ever going to. Smithville, right down Precinct, where Granny and Grandpa used to stay, and that was all Smithville, all the way up to that tree, as you come out. Like I say, it was Smithville, Keller, and Colleyville. They had a little mom and pop grocery store, cemetery, church, barbershop, post office. That was Smithville, and Main Street. In Smithville, there was a Smithville cemetery off Main Street where I've got some family over there, and I've got a lot of friends. It's an old cemetery, and as you first walk in, my granny's 2 sisters are buried on the right as you open the gate to the cemetery. And like I said, I've got a lot of friends out there. And then the cemetery, Arwine Cemetery, were all the descendants that were, are buried there, and it's getting pretty packed too, but that's where all my family is in the Arwine Cemetery. We used to, all go out in the country and stuff, and we just go out and ride, and on a nice Sunday afternoon. And there was a big old turkey barn, with thousands, it looked to me like thousands, I don't know, maybe hundreds, but it looked like thousands, and big old turkey barn. Next thing you know, the airport's coming out there, and all the stuff was cleared away. There is no more turkey barn. It's just all now, the ground, the airport grounds and stuff, but all the country was gone as soon as that airport came. A lot of people moved here because of the airport. One of my friends, her daddy was a pilot. And of course, they moved out here to Hurstview, out here in Hurst, and, that's where a lot of the people came from. I stayed till I was 15 And then I went to Palm Springs, got married, and had a son. Excuse me. And everything was different. I couldn't even recognize the street I was on, you know. It was, and where there used to be fields was 3-story houses, you know. But yeah, this place grew up a lot from where I come from, you know. But you know, the good people, all the country, being raised in the country and being raised in the city is two whole complete different things, because the city people don't know where the apple even comes from, you know, or where your potatoes come from. You got to dig them out the ground. People don't, you know, kids from the city don't know potatoes that comes out of the ground. They probably think it comes on a tree or something. You know, but the country just been more peaceful. You know, this area is just peaceful to me. And California's a lot different. You know, the people, they're not Hurst, you know. But yeah, and every time I've come back, this place has grown even more. His name was Travis John Hurst. I had him as a Hurst. But then I married his daddy, and I changed it to Baker, so it was Travis John Baker. He had trouble. His heart was hitting his lung, breathing, or had some trouble. And then cancer, melanoma, and killed him within 3 months. They were going to cut his arm off, but he passed away first. Texas has my heart. I was born out there in Palm Springs, California, but Texas has my heart because I'm a descendant. I enjoy the name because that's my name. You know, I'm nobody, but I know that my great-great-grandpa was somebody. You know, he was nice enough to let the railroad come through. He could have said no, you know. But just knowing what I know about the Hurst, I'm proud to be one. You know, not everybody was perfect, but there sure were some darn good people in my eyes and in my heart. I would come from the bottoms. I'd walk 8 miles to go to my daddy and granny's house, you know, to just say hey for the day. And just walking and opening that front door of my daddy's house, just the smell and the peace I would get. I would make it a point to come as often as I could to see my daddy and get that enjoyment that I felt. And like we'd all be at the lake on the weekend, we'd go to daddy's, open that front door, and everything was wonderful. You know, just the peace. My daddy's in the cemetery and all my family's there, so I plan on staying and going there when the time comes. But yeah, that's why I like the Armand Cemetery. We're all together. And I know where I'm going. You know, and when I go there, I get just the peace that, you know, I don't get sad, I get happy because all of my memories, you know, the happy ones, the good ones are all good to me. You know, so when I even go to the cemetery, I feel good. You know, my name's not there yet, but I mean, you know. But yeah, I really enjoyed being a Hurst.